One of the most compelling arguments for God's existence is the moral argument. And yet there are skeptics who have tried to challenge this argument, understandably so. But are those challenges valid? I'm joined today by Dr. Travis Campbell, who's going to help address that broad question. Travis, first of all, just as a way of review, could you outline the moral argument for God's existence for us?
Sure. If God does not exist, then objective moral values and principles do not exist. But objective moral values and principles do exist, therefore God exists.
Now, one challenge to the moral argument is labeled Euthyphro's dilemma. So what is that exactly, and how can we respond to that challenge?
Well, for a little bit of background, Euthyphro was a character in one of Plato's dialogues. In fact, he wrote a book called The Euthyphro, or Euthyphro. And this was a dialogue that took place between Socrates and this character named Euthyphro. And the question was raised, and I'm going to put the question in its more modern form, because it was originally raised in a polytheistic context. But the modern form of the dilemma is the good good because God wills it, or does God will it because it is good? Now that dilemma brings to the issue, what is really the foundation of the existence of these moral values? If you say the good is good because God wills it, that means you're grounding all of our moral values in the will of God. And that makes morals arbitrary. God could will today that torturing babies for the fun of it is wrong, but tomorrow God could will that torturing babies for the fun of it is okay. And because His will defines what is and is not moral, then we would be under moral obligation to torture babies for the fun of it. And many people would cry out against something like that. They would say that would be horrible. That would undermine the very point of ethics. In fact, that would entail relativism, because God wills it is good, and therefore we're just sort of at the whims of His will in any given day. Religious traditions that are bought into this would include most versions of Islam, because God is an absolute will who determines what is and is not good. And even some Christians in the Middle Ages and even up to our day have embraced a viewpoint called voluntarism, the idea that God is the one who, by His voluntary will, wills that certain actions are okay. And I think it's pretty clear why we want to avoid that sort of thing. But the other option is not that much better. In a sense, it entails a kind of finite godism. It says God wills it because it is good, meaning that there's a thing called goodness out there, and God is conforming His will to what is good. By the way, this was Socrates' answer to the dilemma. So for Socrates, the good transcends the gods. And if this is the answer to the question, is the good good because God wills, or does God will it because it is good? If we go with that second prong, then we have to say that God Himself is limited with respect to goodness. Goodness transcends God. And that automatically means that God is irrelevant for ethics, which makes the moral argument unsound, because the good could exist totally without God.
So then how do we respond to this dilemma?
Traditionally, most Christians and most Jews have responded to the Euthyphro dilemma by embracing what is called essentialism. And that is to say that the good just is God's character. Or to put it another way, God is the good. Thomas Aquinas made a very important point, and he wasn't the first to make it, but I think he made it stronger than anybody before him, that God doesn't have the property of goodness. He doesn't have the property of power. He doesn't have knowledge. You'll notice that if you have something, you can lose it. I have knowledge, but I can lose it. I have goodness, I can lose it. Thomas Aquinas argued that whatever God, quote unquote, has, He actually is. God is the good. And this is really what an application of what we call the doctrine of divine simplicity. God is all of His attributes, essentially. So the good is not something that transcends God. Rather, God is the good. And he created a universe where he allowed his attribute of goodness to be manifest in the universe as a reflection of himself. And so to the degree we participate in goodness, we are participating in an attribute that God himself is. And so when God gives his moral law, it's a law that flows out of his essential character. This is why it's called essentialism. It flows out of his essence. And because his essence is unchanging, we don't have to worry about whether today he's going to determine that murder is bad and tomorrow he's going to say murder is okay. That's simply something that the Judeo-Christian ethic would never have to worry about, given the truth of essentialism.